We are talking about President Obama being called the most radical president in American history by former House Speaker Newt Gingrich. Gingrich's statement was bold, but certainly not unique when criticizing this president. Take a listen.
The radical left leadership of this party bears much more resemblance to Nazi policies than anything we on the right believe in at all.
Our cross-country tour coincides with the release of my first book in 6 years. It's called Conservative Victory, Defeating Obama's Radical Agenda.
He has given us an administration of radicals that have an agenda.
A committed socialist ideologue in the White House. Name is Barack Hussein Obama.
Well, if the president really is a radical, he might just have some company. With me to talk about it is presidential historian Doug Brinkley, CNN senior political analyst David Gergen, and also James Peterson, a professor at Bucknell University, joining us as well. David, let me go back to Newt Gingrich for a second. He didn't just call Barack Obama radical, he called him the most radical president in American history. What did you make of that?
Listen, Newt Gingrich is a very good debater. He knows how to make his points. And what is he doing here, Campbell? He's trying to throw up as many charges as he can against Barack Obama and see what sticks. And this charge of being radical out of the mainstream is an attempt by the right to push Obama out and be perceived as someone who's trying to bring us a Western European-style government that's going to be socialist in nature and going to destroy a lot of our freedoms. I would remind you that it was only a few years ago that people were calling George W. Bush a radical, and publishing books calling our radical regime because they wanted to paint him out as someone who was taking his war right and left and stealing all the liberties and everything like that. This is sort of not, it's not standard political rhetoric, but it's well within historic traditions.
James, I know that you have a certain interpretation of this word when applied to this president. You study how language is used. When you hear guys calling this president radical, what does it mean to you?
Well, I think we have to put it in the broader context of the ways in which radical has been racialized since about the mid-20th century here in America. So oftentimes when you hear the term radical now, there's usually a racial component to that designation. Think about the Black Panthers from the 60s, or think about when we talk about radical Islam. Right? We're normally thinking of a certain racial designation that goes with that. And if you think about the undercurrent of all this conversation that we see coming from the extreme right, like the Tea Party folk, a very homogenous group, a racially homogenous group, I think we can get a better understanding of the very nuance of race that's operating here. Yes, it is about making Obama an outsider, but one of the easiest ways to do that is to ostracize him along the lines of race.
Before I go to Doug on this, because I want him to give us the more historical perspective, what do you think of David, of what James just said?
I must say I just sharply disagree. I think it's unfair when people take issue with the president from the right to suddenly see a racist hiding behind within the suit. It was only a few years ago that there was a column written about Franklin Roosevelt, well, since the 60s, just a couple of years ago, written about Franklin Roosevelt, calling him a radical in the White House, and it was written by an African-American columnist for the New York Times. Now, I would just tell you, I do not think that was a racist comment, nor do I think what Newt Gingrich was saying should be seen as a racist comment.
I certainly am not saying that Newt Gingrich is a racist. I'm actually saying that Newt Gingrich is very smart. He's very much aware, I think, of some of the undertones of the kind of conversations we've had around his presidency.
But you're saying he was racializing the issue. And
no, I'm saying the term radical has been racialized. I'm saying that, no. With all due respect, I have much respect for you, sir. I'm saying that the term radical itself has been racialized over time. Not that Newt Gingrich has done it, but surely we
why would you bring it up then with regard to the? Why would you then bring it up with regard to Newt Gingrich if you were not suggesting that's what he was doing?
Because I think that within the context of our critique of Obama, race is always on the back burner. And the attempt to get the Republican Party to cohere around certain issues, race has been used. Maybe not explicitly, but certainly implicitly.
All right.
And I think when people think about radicals, the image that comes to mind usually now is radical Islam, or a person with a black fist in the air, or a Chavez. There's usually a racial designation that attaches to it. I think it's an interesting strategy for Newt Gingrich to apply, but I'm not calling him a racist. I'm saying that when we think about the term radical in America, many people attach racial issues to that.
All right, wait, hold on, David. Let me bring Doug. Let's get a little broader here, and let me have Doug talk a little bit about who really was a radical president when you put this in a historical context.
Well, the word radical's used for our founding fathers, Paul Revere and Sam Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Abraham Lincoln is considered a radical for back in the time of the Civil War. But I think when Newt Gingrich was using the word radical, it really has a 60s connotation, not a racial one as much as the 60s. Remember, Tom Wolfe wrote the famous essay about radical chic, and it's part and parcel for kind of Obama being an elite in a way, a liberal elite. And more to the point, I mean, radical, by Newt Gingrich calling him that, seems to me mild. I mean, he has a book coming out called To Save America, Stopping Obama's Secular Socialist Machine. So you're seeing Newt Gingrich, who did his PhD in history and is really quite a fine historian, wanting to get into the political game. I thought the word radical wasn't as interesting as the fact that Gingrich was talking about taking back Congress today, trying to remind people that in '94 he was the one who orchestrated that victory, and I think he's trying to show that he's going to be the one to orchestrate this congressional comeback this year come January. And in many ways, the more interesting dynamic wasn't the anti-Obama sentiments here, that's to be expected, but it's the Palin Gingrich square off with Obama. You have Palin saying, I'm for no to all Obama, and Gingrich was trying to use the word yes. So it was a lot of political theater going on, but I don't think Newt Gingrich is a racist.
And to that point, I think the bottom line is whatever this overheated rhetoric actually says, what it's about is to serve one goal, and that's kicking him out, kicking Democratic colleagues of his out of power in Congress. So let me just ask you, let me ask all of you, but start, Doug. Historically speaking, has this worked to use sort of radical to define your opponents?
Well, of course it does. I mean, Ronald Reagan ran in 1980 against this sort of 60s radical. He was governor of California and Berkeley radicals, and it had a connotation for Reagan. And Gingrich is trying to become an inheritor. In many ways, he is an inheritor of a Reagan tradition. But the speech, and if you read all of Newt Gingrich's speech today, was a very well-crafted political speech. And I was in some ways surprised at how much he's ready, I think, to get into it now. His book's coming out this spring. He sees this year as that he can claim that somebody like Palin or Perry don't know about Washington politics, and he's going to get Congress back to vote down. So I thought it was an important speech if you're looking at Gingrich as a potential long shot candidate in 12.
James, let me give you the last word here. We're almost out of time.
Sure. I mean, what will happen is this will work. It's a great strategy. Think about how homogenous the Republican Party has come. If there's a way to galvanize or exhort them or get them out there to vote, one way to do it is to do the us and them strategy. I'm not saying Newt Gingrich is a racist, but there is a racial component to the term radical that will be applied by some people in the society when they hear it.
All right, gentlemen, appreciate it. James Peterson, Doug Brinkley, and David Gergen.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys.